My daughter called me the help in front of her rich friends, so I fired her husband. On the night of my daughter's housewarming party, the one I helped pay for, I stood quietly by the piano, watching her toast to new beginnings. Then, in front of all her friends, she pointed at me and laughed. Don't worry, everyone. My dad's basically the help tonight, making sure everything runs smoothly. The room froze. My daughter's laughter echoed through the silence I built for her. In that moment, I wasn't her father anymore. I was her prop. In the very house my money had bought. But I didn't shout. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled and said, "You're right, sweetheart. I am the help." Because what she didn't know was that by Monday morning, her husband's name would vanish from every contract, every keycard, every account tied to my company. Before I tell you how I did it, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Richard Hayes paused at the top of the stone steps, clutching the bottle of Cabernet he'd brought. Even though he knew there was already enough wine inside to drown a small town, the house rose before him like something from a lifestyle magazine, white glass panels, a manicured lawn that looked airbrushed, and the faint scent of cedar and money. He'd paid the down payment, of course, but now, standing there, he felt like a guest invited to admire someone else's success. Inside, the grand foyer was full of people who looked professionally happy. There was laughter, polished shoes, and the soft clink of glassware. A white grand piano sat by the window unplayed, purely ornamental. The ceilings were so high that voices seemed to echo back, slightly delayed, like applause in an empty theater. Amelia spotted him and hurried over, her sequin dress catching the light. "Dad," she said brightly, giving him a quick hug that smelled of expensive perfume and nerves. The embrace was brief, half for him, half for the audience watching. "I'm so glad you made it. Isn't the place amazing?" "It's beautiful," Richard said, meaning it but feeling the words land flat. He wanted to tell her that the stonework reminded him of the quarry upstate where he spent his first summer job, but she was already waving at a passing couple, slipping into another smile. Thomas, tall and polished in his tailored navy suit, was holding court near the bar. "Dom Perignon 08, he announced as he popped the cork. A friend whistled. "Wow, Thomas, you must have just closed a big deal." Thomas grinned, glanced briefly in Richard's direction, then turned away. "You could say that. The future's looking bright." The laughter that followed was warm and admiring. Richard's hand tightened around his glass of water. He knew the champagne was from the housewarming gift he sent, and that big deal was, in truth, the generous performance bonus Richard himself had approved at the firm just last month. He didn't mind generosity. What stung was the invisibility of it. Amelia floated by again, introducing him to people as my dad, Richard, in a tone that somehow made him sound like a minor character in her biography. Her friends nodded politely, their smiles practiced. He saw the way their eyes flicked from his worn leather watch, his father's old Bulova, to Thomas's new Rolex. It was quick, instinctive, and wordless, a silent recalibration of social worth. A woman with a diamond bracelet leaned toward Amelia. "Your home is stunning. Did you design the layout yourselves?" "Oh, yes," Amelia said smoothly. "Thomas handled the big picture, and I managed the details." Richard almost smiled. He remembered sitting with the contractor in this very lot long before there were walls, going over blueprints and financing options, while Amelia was still comparing marble colors on Pinterest. But he said nothing. He'd promised himself tonight wasn't for corrections. He wondered, letting the sounds blur. Jazz humming from hidden speakers, laughter echoing under chandeliers. Every detail whispered access, the kind of luxury meant to be seen, not lived in. By the buffet, he overheard snippets. "So proud of Thomas, he's really made it. Amelia's hosting skills are next level." He sipped his water. The glass was crystal, cold, and thin, and he could see his reflection distorted in the base, small, tired, out of place. A memory surfaced, Amelia crying at his kitchen table 3 years ago, her mascara streaking. "I can't live without him, Dad. We just need a solid start, a place to build something." He had agreed, writing the check that night, convincing himself that love was reason enough. Now, watching her glide from guest to guest, He realized she wasn't building a life, she was curating one. When she came back to him, it was because two women had approached. "Dad, these are the Parkers. They just moved in down the street." Richard extended a hand, but Amelia's attention had already drifted to someone waving from across the room. "Excuse me, just a sec, Thomas." She hurried off. The Parkers smiled awkwardly. "Lovely event," the husband said, before spotting someone else he knew and moving on. Left alone, Richard retreated to a quiet corner near the piano. He liked the feel of the wooden keys beneath his fingers, smooth and cold, untouched. He'd once played Autumn Leaves for Amelia when she was 6, her small hands clapping at the end. She used to ask him to play again. That memory felt like a postcard from a different life. From his corner, he watched the choreography unfold. Amelia's laugh grew brighter when she talked to people wealthier than herself. Thomas's posture changed depending on who was listening, relaxed with old friends, puffed up with new investors. They were fluent in the language of aspiration. Every so often, one of them would glance at him as though to confirm he was still there, like checking if the lighting was right. A waiter passed with a tray of flutes. "Champagne, sir?" "No, thank you," Richard said softly. "Just water's fine." The night deepened. Outside, the pool lights shimmered like bottled moonlight. Inside, the air was perfumed with candle wax and pretense. Richard leaned back against the wall, invisible but observant. He watched Amelia throw her head back, laughing at something Thomas whispered. To everyone else, it looked like happiness. But he caught the flicker the split second where her eyes dimmed before she forced the smile back on. For a moment, he almost stepped forward, wanting to remind her she didn't have to perform. But then someone touched her arm, and she turned away, radiant again. Richard's gaze dropped to the marble floor. It was perfect, spotless, reflective, just like everything else here. But he could feel the cracks beneath it, the hairline fractures no one noticed until they widened. He took another sip of water and let the music swell. He realized that, for all the noise, the laughter, the lights, he hadn't been really spoken to all night. Across the room, Amelia threw an arm around Thomas, posing for a photo beside the piano. Flash, laughter, flash again. The photographer asked for one with Dad. She hesitated barely a second, but enough for Richard to see it. Then she smiled, waved him over, and linked her arm through his. The camera clicked. Her perfume, her laughter, the bright glimmer of the ring on her finger, it was all part of the same performance. When the photo was done, she turned back to her friends. Richard stood there a moment longer, holding his empty glass. He realized her smile wasn't for him. It wasn't for anyone, really. It was a part of the show. And he was just a forgotten prop in the background of her perfect scene. The party was in full swing when it happened. Someone Richard never caught who at first laughed too hard, gestured too wide, and the deep red contents of a wine glass arced through the air before landing squarely on the pristine white rug in the center of the room. It was instant chaos, the kind that silences a room before it explodes. Conversations died mid-sentence. The jazz faltered as if even the speakers were embarrassed. The wine spread slowly, like a bruise blooming under perfect skin. "Oh my God," Amelia cried, her voice slicing through the air. She hurried forward, staring at the stain in disbelief. "My rug! It's silk from Iran!" The young woman who'd spilled it looked stricken. Her hand trembled as she dabbed uselessly with a cocktail napkin. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't." "It's fine," Amelia said sharply. But her eyes never left the carpet. Her voice was all surface, not fine at all. Richard felt something twist in his chest. He stepped forward before he even thought about it, instincts older than the room itself taking over. "Club soda," he said to a passing waiter, calm and firm, "and some salt." Quickly, the young man blinked, startled, then ran toward the bar. Richard crouched beside the stain, loosening his tie. "You'll be fine," he told the guest gently. "Don't worry, happens all the time." He'd cleaned worse spills off, worse floors in his life. Stains could be fixed. Humiliation was harder. He poured the sparkling water over the spot and sprinkled salt with steady hands. Years of solving problems, financial, human, practical, had taught him that quick, quiet action was often the best response. But when he looked up, expecting at least relief on his daughter's face, What he found instead was horror. Amelia was frozen, her expression caught between panic and pride. Around her, a ring of guests watched, neighbors, colleagues, donors, every pair of eyes on the kneeling man in the cashmere sweater, her father, on the floor. And then she laughed, too loudly, too brightly. "Don't worry, everyone," she said, waving her manicured hand. "My dad's got it covered. He's basically the help tonight, making sure everything runs smoothly." For a second, no one moved. Then came the laughter, thin, brittle, and nervous. It spread around the room like static. Richard's fingers froze against the salt shaker. The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence. The help. He stayed very still. He could feel every heartbeat, slow and deliberate. His knees ached against the rug. He looked up at her, not his employee, not the woman who'd grown into this glittering stranger, but his little girl, the one who used to ask him to fix her broken dollhouses and stain her own fingers, helping him paint the porch. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Her laugh grew louder, thinner, desperate. She clung to it the way drowning people cling to debris. Her friend smiled too hard, relieved to have permission to find it funny. Only the woman who'd spilled the wine looked like she wanted to vanish. "Mr. Hayes, please, let me." "It's all right," he said quietly. His voice was even steady, the way it got in meetings when something far more serious had gone wrong. "It's just a rug." He stood, brushing his palms together. The red mark was fading already. The stain would come out. The damage had already been done. When he looked across the room, his gaze landed on Thomas. Thomas stood a few feet away, glass in hand, mouth half open as though words had considered leaving him but changed their minds. His face was polite, his stance carefully neutral. Richard waited. Thomas shifted his weight. He smiled vaguely at someone nearby. Then he shrugged barely, almost invisible, but enough. A small, cowardly motion that said, "This isn't my fight." Richard's breath came slow and measured. He felt neither anger nor shame now, just a cold, perfect stillness. He turned back to the table, picking up a napkin, and laid it gently over the damp spot. The guests began talking again, their conversations thin and forced. Someone asked where the rug was from, and Amelia launched into an elaborate explanation about silk weavers and shipping delays, as if her father weren't standing 2 feet away. He listened, or at least pretended to. The laughter rose again, then fell. The party recovered, in the way parties do after small tragedies too quickly, too shallowly. Richard moved toward the window, setting his empty glass down on a ledge. From there, he could see his reflection and the crowd behind it. He looked like a stranger in his own story. No one approached him. Not Amelia, not Thomas. The woman who'd spilled the wine caught his eye once, mouthed, "I'm sorry," and he nodded, offering the faintest smile. She looked more human than anyone else in the room. For the rest of the evening, Richard said very little. He watched the people who called themselves family and realized that the performance from earlier hadn't ended, it had simply reached its cruelest act. When Amelia raised another toast, "To new beginnings," the guests cheered. Glasses clinked. Thomas slipped his arm around her waist, his smile practiced. Richard stood still, watching. Then, across the glittering room, Thomas's eyes met his, just for a moment. It wasn't long, maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough, because in those seconds, something passed between them, an understanding colder than anger, sharper than betrayal. Thomas blinked first. He looked away, pretending to listen to a guest beside him. Richard didn't move. He simply watched, calm and quiet, as if he were taking mental notes. Not as a father anymore, as a man who'd just seen the truth and was deciding what to do with it. The red stain had vanished from the rug, but a new one had started somewhere else, invisible and permanent. The rift had opened, and this time he knew exactly how wide it was. By the time the last guest left, the air in the house had gone flat, like champagne left open too long. The music had faded, the caterers were clearing plates, and the glamour that had held the evening together now looked cheap and exhausted under the hallway lights. Amelia stood by the door, smiling too brightly. "Dad, thank you for coming, and for helping with the rug. You're a lifesaver." Her voice was sugary, brittle. She said it as if the insult earlier had never happened. as if the help was a term of endearment now. Richard smiled, slow and measured. Of course, he said, his tone calm enough to make her relax. Wouldn't miss it. Thomas appeared beside her, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like a man who'd been hosting, not watching. Yeah, thanks, Rich. Great party, huh? We really appreciate your support. Richard looked at him for a moment, at the loosened tie, the smug tiredness, and almost laughed. Support, he thought. That's one word for it. He gave a polite nod and left. Outside, the night was cold and strangely clean. The drive home was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine and the soft tick of the turn signal at every intersection. His hands on the steering wheel were steady. He didn't replay the words. He didn't allow himself to. By the time he reached his own house, a smaller, older one tucked in the quiet suburb, he wasn't angry. Anger was too loud, too wasteful. What he felt was something else. Clarity. Saturday was silent. He went out to the woodworking shed behind the house, the one he hadn't used much since retiring from the company's day-to-day grind. Dust motes drifted through the light like slow snow. The air smelled of cedar, varnish, and time. He sat on the stool near his workbench, not to work, but to think. His tools hung neatly on the wall, each one in its place. He'd always found comfort in outer wood that could be measured, cut, corrected. People, though, weren't so easy. He stared at the half-finished cabinet he'd been building for Amelia years ago, a wedding gift she never picked up. We've got a decorator, Dad, she said back then. She'll take care of all that. The project had remained where it was, perfectly sanded but unfinished, like a conversation left mid-sentence. He took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. It wasn't about the insult anymore. It was about the pattern, about all the times he'd chosen love over logic and how it had made everything worse. Flashback. The promotion. 3 years earlier, he'd been in the boardroom at Hayes Manufacturing, sunlight glancing off the conference table. The CEO, Evelyn Grant, had looked at him over her glasses. Thomas Williams, she said, skeptical. You really want to make him vice president of sales? He's got potential, Richard had replied. He just needs a chance. Evelyn shook her head. He lacks depth, Richard. He's flashy, but he doesn't follow through. You know that. It's the lie it is. Richard had smiled, tired but certain. He's family now. Let's give him the tools to grow. He remembered those words now, how naive they sounded. Tools to grow. Thomas hadn't built anything except his own ego. Flashback. The failed project. The email had arrived 2 years later. Subject line. Urgent market expansion, Southeast Division. The expansion had been Thomas's idea. Big promises, bigger projections. By the time the losses came in, it was too late. A 6-figure disaster. Richard had spent sleepless nights making calls, moving funds, quietly covering the shortfall with his own savings. He told no one. When Amelia found out the project had turned around, she'd hug Thomas, eyes full of pride. I knew you'd pull it off, she said. And Thomas, standing there in Richard's office, had smiled that same hollow smile he wore last night. By late afternoon on Saturday, Richard finally stood. His knees cracked as he moved toward the workbench. He picked up a small chisel, turned it in his hand, then set it back down. He wasn't going to fix wood this time. He was going to fix something else. Sunday morning came pale and quiet. He brewed coffee black, strong, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. He wrote 3 words at the top. Plan, Thomas W. He began listing everything. The emails, the project memos, the bonuses approved under questionable circumstances. Each line was a nail in the box he'd been building without realizing it. He opened his laptop, scrolled through archive folders. There were enough digital breadcrumbs to lead any investigator to the truth, but he didn't need an investigator. He only needed precision. At noon, he drove to the office. The parking lot was empty except for a janitor's car. The security guard waved him through old habit. Inside, the building was quiet, almost sacred. He unlocked his office, the one they still called Chairman Emeritus, and the familiar scent of paper and coffee grounds greeted him. He sat down at his desk. The glow from the monitor reflected off his glasses. One by one, he opened files. Performance reports, HR complaints, travel expense approvals. He saw what he had ignored before: patterns of arrogance, carelessness, mediocrity protected by proximity. He clicked on the folder labeled Executives. The organizational chart spread across the screen, tidy and hierarchical. His name still sat at the top, grayed out but not erased. Below, neatly boxed, was Thomas Williams. Richard stared at that name for a long moment. He clicked it open. Inside were links, project reports, salary details, disciplinary notes. He hovered over terminate access, then smiled faintly and shook his head. Not yet. Monday. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long strips of light across the desk. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimed 6 times. Richard reached for his watch, a simple silver piece he'd worn since college. It was scratched, sturdy, unpretentious. Unlike Thomas's gleaming Rolex, he adjusted the band, then turned off the monitor. The office went dark, save for the faint reflection of his own face in the black screen. Everything was ready. He stood, gathered his coat, and glanced once more at the quiet hallway. Tomorrow was Monday, and for the first time in years, he looked forward to going to work. The morning began like any other Monday, clear, bright, and full of false promise. Thomas Williams pulled into the company parking lot in his silver Audi, music blaring just loud enough to make him feel important. He had his usual grande cappuccino from Blue Bottle in one hand, phone in the other, scanning through weekend messages filled with congratulations on the amazing party. Amelia had handled things beautifully, he thought. Even that awkward rug incident had blown over. His father-in-law had stayed quiet. Old men sulked, but they didn't fight back. He whistled as he stepped out of the elevator on the executive floor. "Morning," he said to the receptionist with a wink. "Big week ahead." She smiled politely, but didn't quite meet his eyes. Thomas didn't notice. He pushed open the frosted glass door to his office. Mid-hum of a tune, already rehearsing what he'd tell his assistant about the new client. Then he stopped. Richard Hayes was sitting in his chair, not across the desk, not waiting in the visitor's seat. Sitting squarely in the leather chair behind the desk, Thomas's desk, fingers steepled, calm as stone. "Rich!" Thomas forced a laugh, trying to cover the sudden, inexplicable chill in his chest. "What a surprise! Getting an early start? You know you don't have to." He gestured vaguely toward the desk. "I've got things covered here." Richard didn't move, didn't even blink. "Have you, Thomas?" His voice was smooth, almost gentle. "Let's review what covered means. If you have the French skills, Ed," the words landed like a pane glass. Thomas's grin faltered. "Listen, if this is about Friday night," Richard cut him off with a small wave of his hand. "Friday was enlightening. But no, this is about work." He gestured toward the folders neatly stacked on the desk. "Let's start with the Hamburg project." Thomas' stomach dropped. "Hamburg?" Richard opened the top file with the precision of a surgeon. "A loss of $1.2 million. Your report blamed market volatility. The actual post-audit shows negligence. Your team entered a partnership without due diligence. You didn't even review the supplier's financials." "That wasn't," Thomas began. Richard's tone stayed level. "Then there's the Southeast expansion. You remember that one, I'm sure? The one where you miscalculated freight costs by 40%? Thomas' face flushed. "Those numbers came from accounting. You can't pin." "I can." Richard's voice hardened. "Because you signed the reports. You took the bonus tied to them. And when the projects failed, you used company money to host client dinners that were purely social. You built 4 nights at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami under sales strategy meetings." The color drained from Thomas's face. His hand tightened on his coffee cup. "You're really gonna dig up paperwork like this? After everything I've done for this company?" Richard tilted his head slightly. "Everything you've done?" He almost smiled. "Let's talk about that. You were hired because Amelia wanted stability. You were promoted because I overrode every objection from the board. You were protected when projects failed, because I personally covered the losses to protect my daughter's pride." Thomas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The room was very still, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Richard's gaze was steady. "You didn't just fail as an employee, Thomas. You failed as a leader. You blamed others, hid your mistakes, and mistook silence for success." Thomas tried for indignation. "This is ridiculous. You're only doing this because you're angry about that stupid joke at the party. Amelia told me This isn't about the joke, Richard said, his voice low but cutting. This is about integrity. This company was built on honesty and work. You've shown neither. For a moment, Thomas's confident facade cracked. Rich, come on. You can't just walk in here and... I can, Richard interrupted quietly. I'm the founder, the CEO, and the majority shareholder. I can, and I am. He reached into the folder and pulled out a crisp envelope, sliding it across the desk. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. All access to company accounts and correspondence will be revoked by noon. Thomas stared at it, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. You can't. Amelia won't stand for this, he said finally, voice trembling on the edge of disbelief. She'll call the board. The board already knows, Richard said. And as for Amelia, he paused. You might want to focus on your own affairs before you worry about hers. Thomas's hands shook as he picked up the envelope. You're making a mistake, Rich. You're... Mr. Hayes, Richard cracked it softly. The words landed heavier than any shout could have. Thomas swallowed. Mr. Hayes, then. You're ruining your daughter's life. You know that? Everything she has, this house, this life, is built on what I've done here. Richard stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. No, he said, it's built on what I allowed you to do here. For the first time, Thomas couldn't look at him. His gaze dropped to the desk, to the documents, to the empty chair that was no longer his. Richard looked at the man for one last moment, the same man who had laughed while calling him the help and then hidden behind silence. Then he spoke, calm and final. Security will escort you out. He turned, walked to the door, and didn't look back. Outside in the hallway, the sound of Richard's footsteps echoed with the slow certainty of a gavel. The receptionist looked up as he passed, startled. He gave her a polite nod. Behind him, through the glass door, Thomas was still sitting there slumped, pale, staring at the envelope as if it were a foreign language. Richard pressed the elevator button and waited, hands clasped behind his back. When the door slid open, he stepped inside, catching his reflection in the mirrored wall. Calm, composed, done. He reached for his watch, checked the time. 9:27 amperes. M. By 9:30, Thomas Williams' career and his illusion of control would be over. Richard adjusted his cufflink and smiled faintly, the way a craftsman does after completing a long, difficult repair. Then the elevator doors closed. The office was quiet after Thomas left. Too quiet. The door had clicked shut behind the security guard, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of the city 12 floors below. Richard remained standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. The morning light reflected off the glass towers opposite sharp, brilliant, almost sterile. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't even feel vindicated. What he felt was the stillness that comes after a storm, when the wreckage is visible and there's nothing left to do but acknowledge it. He knew the phone would ring. It didn't take long. The sound broke the silence like a gunshot. He glanced at the caller ID, Amelia. He exhaled once, slow and steady, then picked up. Dad. Her voice came through sharp, breathless, shaking with fury. What did you do? He said nothing. Thomas just called me, she went on, each word cutting through the line. He's destroyed. He said, you humiliated him in front of people. What the hell is wrong with you? Richard rested his palm against the edge of the desk, grounding himself. Amelia. No, she snapped. Don't Amelia me. How could you do this to us? To me? Do you have any idea what you've done? Everything we built, everything we worked for, gone. You're a cruel, jealous old man. You couldn't stand to see me happy, could you? He let her words wash over him, the same way he used to let rain hit the roof during long nights at the factory constant, loud, meaningless, once you realized it couldn't hurt you. She wasn't crying. That was the part that struck him most. It wasn't pain in her voice, it was outrage. Fear, maybe. Fear of losing the life she thought was hers. He didn't interrupt. He learned, after all these years, that silence could speak louder than anger. When she finally paused to take a breath, he said quietly, Are you done? A brief, disbelieving gasp. Excuse me? I just want to know if you're finished. he said, calm, composed. Because when I speak, I'd like you to actually listen. For a few seconds, there was only the static hum of the line. Then, softly but firmly, he began. Amelia, on Saturday, you made a joke. You said I was the help, but there was a misunderstanding. He heard the faint hitch of her breathing, the reflexive denial forming on her tongue. He continued before she could speak. I'm not the help. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. I'm the CEO. I make decisions based on performance. Your husband's performance was unacceptable. Dad, this wasn't personal, he said, cutting through her protest. It was business, and that's something you and Thomas seem to have forgotten what kind of business this is. And whose name is on the building? There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then, nothing. He leaned against the edge of the desk, eyes on the city skyline. You both turned this company and our family into theater. Image over substance, style over integrity. I let it happen because I wanted you to be happy. I thought providing was love, but I realize now, love without boundaries isn't love, it's weakness. Still no answer. He let the silence linger, heavy and absolute. And as for Thomas, he said at last, his tone turned to steel. He's fired. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. There was a sharp, tiny sound, a breath caught, or maybe the start of a sob quickly strangled. Then Amelia's voice returned, lower now, trembling with disbelief. You can't just end people's lives like that. You can't just... I didn't end anyone's life, Richard said softly. I ended a lie. He turned slightly, catching his own reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in years, he didn't see a tired old man trying to stay relevant. He saw the man who'd built something from nothing, who'd worked his way through every shift, every crisis, every betrayal, who'd earned the right to draw a line and mean it. Dad, Amelia said, her voice cracking for real now. What about me? What am I supposed to do? He hesitated just long enough for the truth to sting. Maybe start by asking who you are without all of this? Without what? The house, the parties, the performance, he said quietly. You've mistaken the trappings for the life itself. But you're smarter than that, Amelia. I just hope you remember before it's too late. He waited. The silence stretched until it felt like another presence in the room. Then, in a voice small enough to almost be unrecognizable, she whispered, I can't believe you do this to your own daughter. Richard closed his eyes. The words should have hurt, but they didn't. Not anymore. I didn't do this to you, he said gently. I did it for me. He could hear her breathing, shallow, uneven. Then, nothing. No response, no goodbye. Just the hollow quiet of realization settling in. Richard let the silence hold for a few seconds longer. Then he spoke the last words he would say to her that day. Goodbye, Amelia. He hung up. The phone clicked back into its cradle, the sound small but final. He stayed there for a while, looking out at the city again. The sun had risen higher now, glinting off the glass facade of the next tower over the one with his name on the top floor in brushed steel letters. Hayes Industries. He exhaled, long and steady. It wasn't satisfaction that filled him, it was relief. A deep, quiet relief that came from finally saying what needed to be said. For years, he'd been the man behind everyone's success story, the investor, the fixer, the invisible help. Now, for the first time, he had reclaimed the only role that truly mattered, his own. The first week passed like bad weather gray, constant, and slightly unreal. Richard went about his days quietly, the way a gardener walks his beds after hail. Not gloating at the broken stems, not surprised by them either. He woke early, brewed coffee, answered emails, signed invoices. He ate simple lunches at his desk, took the stairs instead of the elevator. He spoke little and listened much. News traveled faster than he could have imagined. By Tuesday, 2 department heads had stopped by to say, in careful tones, that word was out. By Wednesday, a supplier called to confirm a rumor. Thomas was gone. On Thursday, an old friend on the charity board, Bill Crane, who had known Richard since they sold bike parts out of a rented garage, phoned to say he'd see Richard at the spring gala and, by the by, Had Richard heard? They're already circling. You know how people are, Bill said, weary. It's not pretty. The dominoes were small at first. A personal shopper whose calls went unanswered. A missed lease payment on the silver Audi. Then came the hard thuds. A card decline at a restaurant in the West Loop. A terse voicemail from the bank. A tow truck on a Friday morning that left 2 parallel gouges in the spotless driveway. Neighbors watched from behind slatted blinds, their sympathy curated and distant. At Hayes Industries, Richard kept meetings brief and precise. He did not mention his daughter, and he did not tolerate anyone else doing so. When the junior executive began a sentence with, "Given the circumstances with Amelia," and Richard slid the agenda forward. "We're on item 4, he said. "Product returns. Stick to the work." He was not on feeling. He chose feeling later. The charity luncheon came the following week, the kind of afternoon where cucumber sandwiches sweat under cling film, and people clap politely for long speeches about legacies. Richard didn't attend. He never liked noon events that pretended to be work. But Bill did, and Bill called that evening with the reluctant gusto of a man who hates gossip but knows its utility. "I'm telling you because you should hear from me," he said. Amelia showed up alone and, Rich, it was brutal. He described Amelia entering the ballroom, spine straight, chin firm, the precise walk of a woman insisting on her relevance. For years, the room had turned toward her. Now it rippled away. Margaret blue silk dress, heirloom pearls. The same woman who once flattered Amelia for her impeccable taste glided past with a nod so cool it could chill glass. Conversations thinned when Amelia approached. Smiles stalled mid-face. "I overheard one table," Bill admitted, voice low. "A woman said, 'Poor thing. She tried to fly too close to the sun. Turns out her wings were borrowed.' And some guy finance, the kind who calls his wife, the wife muttered, 'I heard her father cut them off completely.' Imagine being so foolish as to insult the man who signs the checks. It's not just rude, it's financially irresponsible." Bill exhaled. "I wanted to tell them to shut up. I didn't." Richard thanked him and ended the call. He sat for a long time in his kitchen afterward, the steam from his tea ghosting upward. He felt a small, mean spark of satisfaction, then watched it go out. Winning, he realized, felt exactly like losing, only quieter. At night, he remembered things he wished he'd forgotten. Amelia as a freshman, calling near tears because her checking account was doing that thing again. He wired money before she finished the sentence. Senior year, she wanted a Mont Blanc for internship interviews. He bought it and didn't mention that the best signatures he'd ever seen were made with big pens. After graduation, the apartment with a view, the couch that cost more than his first car. He had taught her something he saw, now something precise and dangerous. He had taught her that money solved inconvenience, that love was a swift hand reaching for a wallet. He had not meant to. He had done it anyway. On a Wednesday, he ran into Susan from accounts at the supermarket. She leaned into her card conspiratorially. "I shouldn't tell you this," she said, which meant she would. "But I was in the pasta aisle and saw Amelia and Thomas." She paused. It was hard to watch. He pictured it as Susan described, the bright, indifferent lights, the hiss of the cooler, the long aisle of choices that look identical until they are not. Amelia holding a box of imported tagliatelle, eyes darting to the price, then to a lower shelf with the store brand. Thomas, unshaven, jaw working, saying, "It's pasta. What difference does it make?" Amelia answering too loudly, "The difference is my life isn't this." A couple squeezed past with a baby and did not look at them. Banality replaced glamour. Bitterness replaced banter. Richard went home and sat in his woodworking shop among the planes and clams and offcuts of walnut. He ran his hand over the unfinished cabinet door, Amelia's wedding gift, sent it to silk years ago and never hung. He didn't weep. He didn't rage. He thought methodically about how a thing goes wrong. Not in one break, but by degrees. One compromise that feels like love, another that feels like mercy, a third that feels like patience. You wake up and call it fate. It was choices. By the third week, the call slowed. People in their world adjusted quickly. They always did. The couple who used to brag about their Napa trip now bragged about pickleball scores. Chairs at the gala were filled by other names. The house that had once starred in Amelia's Christmas photos looked a shade dimmer from the street, a little too still. An email from his lawyer arrived on a Sunday, subject line, Williams' residence, final notice. Richard read it at his desk in the dimming light, the rest of the house breathing its evening quiet. The bank had moved to foreclose. Dates, figures, certified mail receipts lined up like soldiers. There was nothing dramatic about it. Money doesn't punish, it concluded. He closed the message and stared at the blank screen until it reflected his face. Older? Yes. Steady? Also yes. He waited for triumph. None came. Only that hollow, exhausted clarity. The financial punishment was finished. The emotional arithmetic remained unsolved. He thought briefly, against his will, of Amelia at 5, kneeling beside him on the porch with a foam brush, dipping and dabbing, saying, "Look, Daddy, I can make it shiny." He had told her then that shine isn't the same as strong. He hadn't believed he needed to say it twice. That night, he wrote no emails, made no calls. He did not text Bill back, though Bill sent a kind line, "Holler if you need anything." He turned off his phone and the house settled around him with the soft thumps and ticks of a place that has learned its people. He washed his single plate, dried it, set it in the cabinet. He chose silence, the kind that isn't avoidance, but boundary. He stepped out to the backyard and stood by the maple that throws a red flag every October. The soil was damp from a brief, apologetic rain. He pressed his palm to the bark and felt, absurdly, something like gratitude for what had held, for what could still be tended. Inside, the computer chimed again. He didn't check it. He made no speeches to himself. He rehearsed no clever lines for some imagined reconciliation. He simply acknowledged what was true. He had drawn a line, and the line had held. He would not cross it for applause or pity. On Monday morning, he would go back to work and talk about freight, margins, a new run of parts that needed a better anodizing process. He would be exact. He would be fair. He would, for a time, be alone. When he finally returned to the desk, the email from his lawyer waited, already read, already decided. The mansion he'd once made possible now belonged to the bank. He clicked the window closed and sat back, feeling at last nothing but emptiness. The numbers had balanced. The losses did not. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? The envelope looked out of place among the usual detritus of a Tuesday. A flyer for gutter cleaning, a glossy coupon book, 2 credit card offers addressed to resident. It was cream-colored, slightly bent at the corner, with his name written in a familiar hand that had once labeled science fair posters and summer camp trunks. Richard, all caps, a little too hard on the downstrokes. He stood at the curb longer than necessary. The maple above him tossed the light pattern over the page, like the world was trying to soften it. He slipped the envelope into his jacket and walked back to the house. In his home office, afternoon sun slanted across the desk. He set the envelope on the blotter. For a moment, he simply looked at it, the way you look at a sleeping animal you're not sure will bite when it wakes. Then he took a letter opener, silver, tarnished, and slit the top in one neat motion. The first line punched the air out of the room. "Dear Dad, I suppose you're happy now. You got what you wanted. We lost everything." He placed the page face down, exhaled through his nose, turned it over again. The paper was thick, expensive, a holdover from another life. Her handwriting rushed and stalled. A freeway with sudden stoplights. He read the next paragraph. "Thomas is not a bad man. He was just trying to fit in. You never understood the pressure I was under. Everyone you know looks at me like I'm a reflection of you. I had to be shiny." He felt that word like grit behind a contact lens. Shiny. He remembered telling her once, long ago, that shine wasn't the same as strong. He kept reading. "I went back to the house to get the last of my things. The rug was gone." Don't laugh. I know. I think that's when I started to cry. It wasn't about the rug. I don't know what it was about. Maybe I do? He set the letter down again, not because he was finished, but because the room had shifted half an inch to the left. He could smell the faintest ghost of her perfume on the paper, citrus and something floral. The kind of scent you buy after asking a saleswoman to tell you what elegance smells like. He read the beginning again, slower, letting the accusation brush against him without catching. Then he read the middle, where justification lived. Pressure, expectations, the social eye. He'd always hated that phrase. Eyes were for seeing, not judging. And yet, he turned to the last page. A smudge of ink where she'd pressed too hard and paused. I remember when I was little, you taught me how to use a screwdriver. My hands were too small. You held them. I remember the feeling like I was doing it, but also you were. I keep thinking about that. I don't know why I'm writing this. He did know. He knew exactly. He closed his eyes and the memory came obediently. Amelia at 5, elbows out, tongue peeking in concentration, turning the screw a quarter inch at a time while his hand cupped hers. The smell of warm pine, her laugh when it caught and held. He returned to the top and read the whole thing again, this time cataloging the weather systems, moving through the paragraphs. The sudden squalls, you got what you wanted. The clearings were sunlight pooled. It wasn't about the rug. The fog, I don't know what it was about. He tried to imagine her at a table somewhere, maybe a coffee shop with wobbly chairs, hesitating over each sentence, daring herself to write, retreating, advancing again. On the second page, the contradictions nodded. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm not asking for money. Maybe I am. I don't know. I'm asking you to see me. Or to tell me how to be seen without all the props. You think I don't hear the whispers? I hear them. I hear you in them, too. Thomas says you hated him from the beginning. That's not true, is it? I keep replaying everything and I can't find the moment we went wrong. Was it one moment? Or 1,000 asterisk? Asterisk. He stood and crossed to the window. Outside, a kid on a skateboard skimmed past, arms out for balance. At the corner, a woman tugged her dog away from a stubborn smell. The world continued unastonished. Back at the desk, he read the letter a third time, listening now for the sound underneath the words. The resentment was still there, acid with a sweet aftertaste. But something else threaded through it, thin, hesitant, real. A glimmer of grief. A question that didn't yet know its shape. He imagined writing back, "Dear Amelia," and then what? A lecture would be neat and useless. Absolution would be dishonest. He imagined calling. He could hear her voice harden the second she picked up, feel the quiet calcify. He imagined doing nothing. He didn't like the man he became in that scenario. Unyielding, clean, safe, small. He laid the letter flat and smoothed the fold with his palm. The paper warmed under his hand. He thought of all the times he'd replaced feeling with fixing, wiring money instead of asking harder questions, upgrading a life instead of upgrading a skill. He could not buy their way out of this place. He could not buy character for someone else. The market was closed. On his credenza sat the unfinished cabinet door. He lifted it a simple rectangle, beveled, made to be held, and carried it to the desk. He set the letter on top of it, then set his hand on both, steadying the stack like it might otherwise drift. A sentence from the letter had slipped past his defenses and lodged somewhere he couldn't reach. I'm asking you to see me, or to tell me how to be seen without all the props. He considered the verbs available to him. Answer, ignore, forgive, refuse, non-fit. Another verb presented itself. Wait. He didn't like it. It felt passive, weak. But maybe waiting wasn't absence. Maybe it was a discipline. Maybe this time the line he drew would include room for a door. He sat very still. The clock on the bookshelf issued small, self-important ticks. The sunlight stuttered as a cloud crossed it, then returned. He picked up the letter again and read the last lines. Asterisk, asterisk. If you write back, don't be cruel. If you don't, I'll understand. I won't. I will. I'm tired, Dad. Are you tired? Amelia. Asterisk, asterisk. He folded the pages along their original crease, then along a new one, then smoothed them back open, irritated with his own fidgeting. He wanted a rule to follow, and found none. He wanted a sentence that would do the work for him, and found only the ache of being a father, which is mostly choosing and then choosing again. He placed the letter on the table, aligning its edges with the wood grain. He looked at the phone. He looked away. For the first time since all of this began, he felt something like helplessness, not the helplessness of a man outmatched, but the helplessness of a man who understands that some repairs require two pairs of hands on the same handle, turning slowly together. He sat there until the light faded from the room. The decision did not arrive. The letter waited, patient as a living thing. Reacher folded it once more and laid it on the table. He rested his fingertips on the crease, then pulled his hand back as if the paper were warm. He didn't know what to do, and for once, there was no one to decide for him. The letter had sat on Richard's desk for days, its edges soft from rereading. Every sentence carried both accusation and something fragile underneath regret, maybe. He didn't know what to say back, so he didn't say anything. Instead, on Thursday evening, he opened his phone and typed a short message. Lunch, Friday. The Corner Cafe. Noon. No signature. No explanation. When Amelia arrived the next day, she looked smaller, somehow her confidence replaced by a kind of restless energy. Her coat was unbuttoned, her sunglasses pushed into her hair. This place? She said, glancing around the cramped cafe. You couldn't pick somewhere quieter? This is quiet, Richard said. A waitress poured coffee into chip mugs. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard reached into his briefcase and laid a folder on the table. I have something for you. She straightened, expecting a check or maybe a lecture. What she didn't expect was a simple printed form and a folded navy blue uniform shirt. A job, he said. Entry level. Quality control at the factory. Her face went blank, then flushed. A job? On the factory floor? Is this a joke? It's not a joke, Richard said evenly. It's a beginning. Her laugh was sharp and hollow. You want to punish me, make me scrub floors? No one scrubs floors in quality control, he said. You'll inspect parts, learn the process, the same way I did. She stared at him, disbelief hardening into anger. You really think I'll wear that uniform, work for people who used to report to me? He didn't flinch. I think you need to understand where value comes from. Not the kind printed on paper, but the kind earned with your own hands. She shook her head. I have a degree. From Columbia. Then you will learn faster, he said. The waitress came by with a refill, sensed the tension, and retreated. Amelia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You can't just fix this with a factory job. I'm not fixing anything, he replied. I'm giving you a foundation. What you build on it is up to you. He stood, leaving a 20 on the table. The office open, Monday, 7 a.m. Always She watched him walk toward the door, the folded uniform still on the table between them. Dad, she said softly, but he didn't turn back. When the bell over the door stopped ringing, she looked down at the shirt. The fabric was rough beneath her fingers, the company logo embroidered in simple white thread. Hayes Industries. She could throw it away. She could walk out and never come back. But instead, she folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. For the first time, she wasn't sure if this was punishment or invitation. Amelia's first morning at the factory felt like walking into another planet. The air smelled of oil and metal, the machines pulsed with an industrial heartbeat, and every pair of eyes seemed to turn her way. Her uniform hung loose, the name patch A, Hayes slightly crooked. She told herself she could handle it a week, maybe two. The supervisor, Maria, handed her a clipboard. Quality control, section B. Follow the sheet. Don't overthink it. Easier said than done. Within an hour, Amelia dropped the wrench, mixed up bins, and marked the wrong measurements. Sweat darkened the collar of her shirt. She'd imagined this job would involve managing people, not crawling under conveyor belts to find missing bolts. By lunch, she felt invisible and exposed all at once. In the break room, conversation stopped when she entered. She poured herself burnt coffee and caught a whisper from the corner. That's the boss's daughter. Wonder how long she'll last. 3 days. The fine day then. She wanted to prove them wrong, but mostly, she wanted to disappear. The next few days were a blur of small humiliations. Maria corrected her often, but without cruelty. Slow down, kid, she'd say. Work's not a race. And then, slowly, something shifted. Amelia began to notice the rhythm, the way the team moved like a living machine. each part relying on another. She noticed the jokes, the nicknames, the quiet respect that bound them, and she noticed how often her father's name came up. Not Mr. Hayes, just Rich. Rich stayed late to fix the press himself once. Rich paid for Carla's kids' braces. Rich knows everyone's birthday. She never heard him talk about like that before, not as a man with money, but as a man who mattered. By the second week, the blisters on her hands had hardened into calluses. The work was still exhausting, but it didn't feel meaningless anymore. She started staying late, asking questions, tracing the lines of technical drawings she didn't fully understand. One night, Maria found her still at the table. "You planning to move in?" she teased. Amelia smiled, sheepish, just trying to figure out how it all fits together. Maria handed her a bottle of water. "Your dad started right here, you know. Swept these same floors." Amelia froze. The hum of the machine seemed to fade. She looked down at the concrete, imagining her father younger, sleeves rolled up, doing exactly what she was doing now. Something clicked, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Maria smiled softly. "Guess it runs in the family." After she left, Amelia sat there alone, holding the bottle of water. The factory lights flickered overhead. For the first time in her life, she felt proud not of what she'd been given, but of what she'd earned. The uniform no longer felt like punishment. It felt like belonging. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? By the time spring rolled around, Amelia no longer felt like a visitor on the factory floor. Her hands were rougher now, her movements efficient, her laughter easy among the workers. She traded designer heels for steel-toed boots, and though the days were long, she carried herself with quiet purpose. That morning, as sunlight slanted through the high windows, word spread that Richard Hayes was on site. The air shifted half excitement, half nerves. He rarely visited unannounced anymore. Amelia tried to stay focused on her inspection log, but when she saw him walking through the aisle, no tie, sleeves rolled up, greeting people by name, her chest tightened. It had been months since they'd last spoken. He didn't notice her at first. She could have stayed silent, let him pass, but the sketch in her hand, the one she worked on for weeks, seemed to burn against her palm. "Dad," she called. He stopped, turned. "I've been working on something," she said, holding out the paper before she could lose courage. "It's a small process change. I think it could cut inspection time in half." He took the sketch and studied it. It was smudged and messy, nothing like the polished proposals he was used to. Still, he didn't hand it back. "How'd you measure the angles?" he asked. "Manual calibration," she said. 2-week sample. Failure rate dropped 12%. He nodded, thoughtful. "You did the math yourself?" She hesitated. "Maria helped me check it." Richard's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "Good teamwork." He looked back down at the paper, tracing her penciled arrows. After a long pause, he said, "This has potential. Let's work on it." It wasn't praise. It was better. It was acknowledgement. For a moment, they stood side by side, both staring at the same lines on the page. Around them, the hum of machines continued, steady and low. "Thomas and I, we're not together anymore," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "You seem steadier now." She exhaled. "I think I finally understand what you meant, that work can build more than money." Richard nodded. "It builds character, and sometimes it rebuilds people." He folded the paper neatly and tucked it into his folder. "We'll test it next week." Then he looked at her, not as the CEO, not as the father who'd once been betrayed, but as someone who saw her for who she had become. "Good work, Amelia." When he left, she stayed a while longer, looking at the spot where they stood. The blueprint, pinned to the wall, fluttered slightly in the draft from the open door. It wasn't perfect, neither were they. But for the first time, she believed that both could be fixed patiently, piece by piece.